Now almost covered this holy trinity of self-improvement and skill development. We've got marginal gains, which helps us to find the path through which we can improve, help us with our motivation, make us see the progress that we're making, even when it doesn't seem like it's the huge, great progress that we may have expected or wanted. And then we've got Kolb's, which is the actual method through which we are making those gains and stacking and compounding those gains in a cycle. So if you were to zoom in on that marginal gains curve, you would actually see multiple cycles of Kolb's going up and down to track that improvement curve. The final part is being able to understand what kind of marginal gain you can expect as you develop different skills, or rather, as you progress through different skills at different levels of competency. And the word competency is something that we're going to be throwing around a lot. You'll see it talked about in live clinics and coaching. You'll hear our coaches talk about it. You'll hear people talk about it on our community. And the idea behind competency is that it's a spectrum. It's not just you're either competent and you can do it, or you're incompetent and you can't. Whenever you learn a new skill, and learning as a skill is one of the most complicated skills that you can learn, you're going to start off not knowing anything about it, and then you're going to end up, hopefully, a master of it. And so there is this framework called the 4 stages of learning, which is a very useful tool to show us what our progression will look like and what type of marginal gains we should be looking for. Now, I previously called this Maslow's hierarchy of learning, and that was corrected by one of our learners. So thanks for catching me out on that. It is falsely often attributed to Maslow, but it is just called the 4 stages of learning, or the 4 stages of competency. And it goes a little something like this. We start off at the bottom with UI, and that stands for unconscious incompetence. So what that really means is that you cannot do it correctly, but you also do not know that you cannot do it correctly. You do not understand what correct looks like. You don't know that maybe sometimes that correct exists. Most people exist here for most skills. For example, this is the reason why if someone learns to do something, then they can be very, very confident about it very, very early on, because they don't actually see all the mistakes that they're making, and they don't realize how much better they could actually be. Unfortunately, sadly, when it comes to learning, despite many, I guess everyone, having gone through an education system for a decade plus normally, they still have unconscious incompetence when it comes to learning skills and learning strategies, because the stuff that is taught in schools is often very outdated, or it simply doesn't work, or it's just not taught at all. So most of the time, people are picking up these skills in a very sort of DIY way, where they're just seeing their friends, they're watching some videos they're putting random things together, and they're creating something, but they don't have a good understanding about what correct and optimum actually looks like. They just have an idea about whether it kind of works for them or kind of doesn't, but there's no comparison. There's no standard there. So this is in a way the hardest place to be, because you don't actually know what correct looks like. And then if this is combined with overconfidence, that's incredibly dangerous, because now not only are you unaware of the fact that you're not good at it, but you also close off to the fact that you could be good at it. And an interesting thing that I've started to do in seminars and workshops to break through this, and if you're listening to this thinking like, yeah, this is applying for everyone, but it doesn't apply for me because I'm special, or whatever reason that you may think that these skills are actually easy for you while they're not easy for everyone else, I want you to think about this. Do you think the version of you 10 years from now would be more efficient and have learned more about how to learn effectively than the version of you today? I mean, assuming that you are interested in this and you keep trying to explore it, like without this program, do you think that you would be better in 10 years than you are today? If the answer is yes, it means that you already know that there are things that you don't know. The idea with the program is that we're just kind of teaching it to you all in one go. And probably we're teaching you more than you would learn through your self-discovery in 10 years. Because it took me 10 years just to go from a point of understanding the research and then training it to people consistently, let alone actually, building the entire system for it. When I did this essentially close to full time for the last decade. So unless you're planning on spending that much time to figure it out for yourself, in 10 years, you probably won't actually learn all of these things. So unconscious incompetence is where we start from. The next part is CI, which is conscious incompetence. And this is the threshold at which we can really start making improvements. So I'm actually going to do this one in green, because even though we are getting it wrong, we have insight into it. We can see that we are doing it wrong. That's meant to be an eyeball, by the way. So we can actually see that we are doing it incorrectly. We may not be able to do it correctly yet. However, we can identify that it's not correct. We can maybe start seeing the patterns of incorrectness. However, no matter how hard we try, we're still not able to do it correctly. For some skills, this period of conscious incompetence might last only 10, 15, 20 minutes. You realize you're doing it wrong, and then you learn the new way of doing it, and now you can do the new way. There are some skills that take much longer to do this. Great example would be like athletics and instruments. You can understand that you're playing something not quite right for a very, very long time, years in fact, before you've actually trained yourself to the point where you can actually do it the way that you know it's meant to be done. It's the same thing with learning and cognitive skills. There are some learning and cognitive skills, especially in deeper encoding, that you may know how you're meant to be able to do it, but when you actually try to do it, you're just not getting that kind of result. It's not clicking for you in that way. But it shouldn't take you years. Normally, those types of things, halfway through the program, you should be able to get a lot of those things clicking. That will be around sort of that 3 months, 4 month period of your journey, maybe. Conscious incompetence, we're starting to see that we're doing it wrong and we're aware of it. And then conscious competence is where everyone wants to be at least, because this is the point at which we are able to do it correctly if we apply effort. This stage is actually very wide. So this stage is very wide, and then this stage is very wide. So there's a difference between being able to do it correctly and then being able to do it correctly and consistently and easily. And all of that spectrum falls within the single band of conscious competence. So if we look at the lower level of conscious competence, let me just expand this out a little bit. We expand that out. The lower level of conscious competence would be it takes a lot of effort and we do not have very good consistency. So for example, if we tried it 10 times, maybe we're only successful 2 out of those 10 times. But we can do it correctly. We just can't do it correctly very often. All the stars have to align, and it takes a lot of concentration and a lot of effort. At the top of conscious competency, it takes very little effort to do it correctly, and our consistency is very high. So for example, if we were to do this 10 times, we would maybe get it right 9 out of 10 times. So at this point, it's almost like second nature. It's almost a habit. And you can imagine that for some skills, to go from here at the bottom all the way through to the top here can take a long time and a lot of practice and a lot of reflection and a lot of what was that? What did you say? Yeah, colbs. Yes. A lot of colbs and marginal gains to get there. The promised land is at the very top. Unconscious competence, which is this UC. And then here we're doing it correctly. So here we're doing it correctly and here we're doing it correctly. And it is a habit. It is a second nature. The effort that it requires is minimal or almost none. In fact, at this point, it would take us effort to do it incorrectly. So the way that we used to do it all the way back down here when we were unconsciously incompetent or consciously incompetent, it would require us effort to actually do it that way again. And that's where we want to be. We have now rewired our brain. We've undergone neuroplasticity. We've made forced neuroplastic changes. We've done cognitive retraining, whatever we want to call it. We have developed a new habit, and that's the best place to be in, because now it's not taking extra concentration to do it. We can start adding more techniques. We can start refining it even further. We can keep building the system. So here are the important considerations about this. Number one, if you have too many things that have not reached at least very high levels of conscious competence or unconscious competence, it is going to be overwhelming. Let's say that we've got 5 techniques and all 5 techniques are at the low levels of conscious competence. It requires a high amount of effort, and we've got a low consistency. Well, first of all, because we've got a low consistency, this can, in some cases, potentially reduce our motivation. And it's important to realize that. And also because we've got lots of effort, if we've got that times 5, we may go into overload. So we want to avoid this type of situation in the first place. We never want to be working on so many skills when all of those skills require a high amount of effort. We only want to add new techniques into our system when our existing set of techniques are at least approaching the level of unconscious competence. And this is the reason why it takes so long to work through this program. It is not just because we just love, wasting your time, or we want to hold you into this program for as long as possible. We are trying to get you to develop these skills as quickly as you can. It's just that it takes time, because it takes time to develop new habits. We don't want to say, here are 44 new tech. In fact, okay, that's funny, because the very, very first time I ever ran, it was actually a time management workshop. The title of the time management workshop was 48 hours in a day. And in that workshop, and I think it's crazy for me to think about this now, I introduced 42, I think, something like that, 42 techniques for time management. I have no idea what I was saying. What do people remember from that workshop? Probably nothing. Probably the fact that there are a lot of techniques, and it was probably even more demotivating. So you don't want to be in that situation. You don't want to be giving yourself 40 different things to work on, all of which require maximum effort, and then you give up on all of them. Give yourself only a couple of things to work on, develop that confidence. This is the reason why the focus list is limited. This is the reason why we're trying to get you to focus on the focus tasks and focus this and clearing through that, focusing on developing and deepening the skill before you move on, and focusing on doing your cobes and experimentation on just a small number of things. Depth is where skill development comes from, not pace, not volume. So that's the first thing. Don't have too many things that require too much effort. Give yourself the time to consolidate before adding new things on. And that's going to be a subjective decision. That's going to be on you to monitor and moderate. We can give you advice on that, but at the end of the day, you're the one that understands how much effort it takes. And so you're the one that's going to have to control that flow. Going slow gets you far. Going fast gets you not very far, very quickly. The next important thing is that when you're at each of the different stages, your marginal gains look different. Let me say that again. Your marginal gains will look different when you're at different stages of learning. This is highly overlooked by most students. When you are down here at the level of unconscious incompetence, your marginal gain is not that you can now do it correctly. If you did something wrong, if there was a problem, if you made a mistake, which is a good thing, by the way, remember, if you made a mistake, the marginal gain is not that you can now do it correctly, because that would be going from unconscious incompetence or conscious incompetence to conscious competence in a single jump. Some people expect that they'll be able to do it correctly and do it easily. They get frustrated if they're doing it correctly, but it's not easy. No, that would be going from like here to here in a single go. You can see that that's not a marginal gain at all. The marginal gain when you are at unconscious incompetence is related to the things that get you closer to conscious incompetence. So those marginal gains would involve becoming more open-minded, being less overconfident, being more willing to experiment, starting to recognize patterns of issues, starting to learn a little bit more about the theory of how to do it correctly versus incorrectly. A lot of the time in the videos in these lessons, all I'm doing is I'm taking you to the point of conscious incompetence. You take yourself to unconscious competence. We give you the resources, the tasks, the activities, the guidelines, the feedback, all the things that aren't in the video lessons themselves, aka really where you're making a real difference to your life. That is the stuff outside, offline sometimes. That sometimes it's not even on the platform. We facilitate it, but it's not happening online. That's what's taking you to unconscious competence and building real skill. In the videos, I'm trying to show you what's wrong and how to do it right theoretically. Then when you're reaching into conscious incompetence, now your marginal gains are about being able to recognize your own mistakes more consistently. Being able to find more ways that you are doing it wrong. If there are 20 ways that you could do it wrong, you are finding as many of those as possible. As you get better and better through conscious incompetence, the number of mistakes you're making is reducing, but you're still not doing it right. You can see how this could be multiple Kolb cycles in itself. And then at conscious competence, you are now working through here. You are lowering the amount of effort that you need and trying to build up your consistency. That is the marginal gain at conscious competence. And at unconscious competence, it's a habit. What you're doing is you're now refining, you're individualizing, you're really personalizing. And so it's really important to understand how you're working through these stages of learning for these different skills and how your marginal gains looks different. Now, this is for skills. When you're developing your knowledge, you do follow a similar pathway, but it can be confusing trying to map your understanding of knowledge to the 4 stages of learning, which I know is confusing because it's the 4 stages of learning, but I try to think about this just for skill development. I find that it's a lot more practical and understandable to try to map your knowledge in terms of higher order versus lower order learning, and the type of knowledge structures that you're creating, if you remember that solo taxonomy that we briefly talked about. So keep these in mind, engage with the tasks and the activities and all the other things that we've got around this lesson and moving forward, and use your Kolbs to build your marginal gains to work your way through these 4 stages of learning.